Good morning to everybody and a warm welcome to the Economic Times Pharmaceuticals Leadership Dialogue presented by Accenture. Today we are going to talk on the subject Pharma Industry 2021 and beyond. We have a very strong panel here for you. Let me introduce them to you first. We have with us Deepak Sapra, CEO, API and Services, Dr. Reddy's. Hello, Deepak. We have Vivek Kamath, Managing Director and General Manager, Specialty Care Pharmaceuticals, Abbott India. Hi, Vivek.
Hi, morning, everyone.
We have Ramesh Swaminathan, Executive Director, Global CFO, and Head of Corporate Affairs at Lupin.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Ramesh. Morning.
Morning.
We have Venu Gopal Vijayendran, President, India Business of Intas Pharma.
Hi, everyone.
Morning, Vijay. We have Vikas Gupta, India Business Head of Cipla.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Vikas. Welcome. And we have with us Rishabh Bindlish, Managing Director, India Life Sciences and Global Generics Lead of Accenture.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Rishabh. And my name is Alokesh Bhattacharya. I'm Senior Editor of the Economic Times, and I will moderate today's discussion. It has been a very painful past months for the country as a whole. Pharmacy of the world, as we like to call ourselves, it has been battered like never before. Images that we have seen and experiences that we have had, they have shaken us to the core. Practically everybody has been touched by the virus in this country in some way or the other. The healthcare industry's shortcomings have been brutally exposed. Shortage of critical medicines for COVID-19 have done more or less the same for the pharma industry. There are systemic challenges and issues, including policy challenges. The government and private sector, they have to work together to take India's pharma industry to an Atmanirbhar situation. But the immediate challenge today is the shortage of vaccines for our large population. Again, the government and private companies, they are working round the clock to address the issue. More and more vaccines are being brought in to augment the supply. Everybody is involved in managing the situation. Practically everyone is involved, right? Right from the government, through policy, through incentives, pharma industry, through massively ramped up production and partnership. Companies like the ones that you work for, I work for, through vaccination of their employees. Even housing societies and other citizens associations, everybody is organizing vaccination camps and trying to get the whole population inoculated. Still, we are running short, right? We are all sprinting to stay in the same place. But meanwhile, in this period, pharma industry performance has shot up from a financial point of view. Industry sales, according to IMS Health, has grown 59% in April 2021 YOY. And on a moving annual turnover basis, sales grew 9.6%, which has been primarily driven by pricing growth of 4.3% and new product launch growth of 4.6%. However, this is hardly the time to talk about growth numbers. As we have seen around us, all of us have seen that as the lockdowns have eased, We have seen scenes of overcrowding, right? People have thronged to the hill stations, and there are unprecedented scenes of crowds in those places and in other places, in markets, wherever the markets have opened. And therefore, the fears of a third wave of the coronavirus have really climbed. Are we prepared to meet the third wave? What needs to be done? How can we strengthen India's pharma industry and the connected healthcare system so that we don't have to see and experience those horrifying scenarios again? It is a very, very difficult situation that we are in today, and it calls for brainstorming between top leaders that we have here with us today. I will start off proceedings by inviting Rishabh Bindlish of Accenture to give us a context on the ground situation. Rishabh, tell us a little bit about the trends that you're seeing, based on all the conversations you're having with clients in India and abroad. You keep talking to pharma companies, consulting with them. You know what's happening on the ground. It would be wonderful to hear from you about the trends that you see out there. Over to you.
Thank you, Alokesh. Thank you for the introductions and a very warm welcome to my distinguished co-panelists who come from very diverse backgrounds. And before I lay out the context of why we are meeting today, I wanted to take a minute and start off by acknowledging the industry for being at the front and center of playing a pivotal role in managing the crisis. Right? It's been a very difficult time, like Alok said. The last 1.5 years have been unprecedented. But we must also recognize uh, all the sacrifices that the frontline health workers, the operator on the shop floor, the executive in logistics, and many in this panel here, who they and their teams have been at the front and center of managing the crisis on a day-to-day situation. Right? They've played an instrumental role in availability of key drugs, and I don't know how many lives would have been saved in the last 1.5 years. So big kudos to the entire industry and to the entire pharma team here. Coming to today's discussion, like Alok said, the idea was for us to deliberate on what are the challenges we have faced collectively in the last year and a half. What have been the learnings? I'm sure there are things that have gone well. There are things that could have been done differently. So let us reflect on some of those. But more importantly, given that the future is slightly unpredictable at this stage, let us attempt to crystal gaze on what the future holds for us, for the industry. There are some things obviously that will get back to normal, and there are some things that will change for good. Uh, what implications does it have, right, on the way we operate, our business models, and what is the support that we need from the government? I think those are the things that we wanted to deliberate in today's meeting. And to Alokesh's second question, from our perspective, based on all the discussions that we are having with clients outside India and in India, we are clearly seeing four key trends emerge, right, during the crisis. The first one, which seemingly looks like a paradox, is protectionism at one end, where we are seeing increasingly governments and countries taking greater control of the healthcare agenda. And by that, I mean they're taking greater controls of supply chain. They want to bring manufacturing closer to the countries. They want a greater control. Historically, if cost was a driver for taking some decisions, that seems to be changing a bit. We are seeing that through the PLI schemes. We are seeing a lot of talk around reducing the dependence on China. We're seeing US wanting to bring manufacturing closer to their countries. So I think that's one aspect of it, where we're increasingly seeing government and countries becoming more conservative and protectionist about healthcare. But at the other end, and that's why I call it a paradox, we're also seeing the world more interconnected than we think it is, right? So no one is safe until everyone is safe. And therefore, equitable access to critical resources and sharing of best practices and collaboration is also a way forward. If that had not happened, it was unlikely that we would have seen a vaccine come out in about 18 months' time. So clearly the collaboration between academia, between industry, and between government is also critical. So the paradox and the balance that one will have to create between being protectionist and yet being collaborative is one trend that will be very interesting to see how it plays out. The second key trend is this entire notion of work and workplace, right? I think clearly the last 18 months have changed the paradigm, the historical paradigms of saying that we need to be in office 5 days a week. Clearly, it has turned its head upside down. So what will work look like in a post-COVID era, right? What does it mean for talent? What does it mean for talent acquisition? What does it mean for gig economy? I think these are things that will emerge over a period of time. I don't see the current status quo being there forever, but I also see it's being extremely unlikely that we'll get back to our usual ways of working going forward. So again, there'll be a balance, but clearly future of work and workplace will undergo a paradigm shift in the future. The third piece that we've seen and through our research is uh, given the unpredictable nature of COVID and likewise, companies that have been agile, that have taken decisions in a decentralized manner are the ones who have come out winners. So very clearly, agility over everything else is the mantra going forward. And that will become extremely critical because no one market is homogeneous. So moving away from this concept of one segment to segment of one, or winning in many Indias, as Unilever calls it, is going to be key because what impacted Europe is what impacted India. And within India, two states behave very differently, and within a state, two cities behave very differently. So clearly our operating models, the decision making, everything will need to be geared towards agility and being able to respond to consumer needs faster. And the last piece really which underpins both future of work, workplace and agility is data. Clearly our ability, I mean, there is so much of data that is getting generated, right, for many years, but companies have done very little to draw insights out of that. And increasingly, we are seeing a lot of conversations that companies are having with us to say, can we generate insights out of this? Can we feed this back to our operating team and to the C-suite for them to be able to take decisions? So clearly, while everyone is talking about digital, etc., for us, digital is just an enabler, technology is just an enabler. Unless we underpin it with smart insights, smart analytics, which can help companies take better decision, digital will not make sense. So in summary, I think the apparent paradox between protectionism and collaboration at one end, future of work and workplace as a second trend, agility over everything else that's as a third trend, and data being the new oil for healthcare and life sciences. Those are the four big trends, and let's invite the other panelists to talk about it, Alokesh, but that was it from my side.
Thank you very much, Rishabh. Some very, very pertinent points you make there. Of course, linking some of those points, what I feel is that, this availability of data is such a critical issue, but the fact is that we are just not able to utilize it properly. I've gone to, hospitals that I've gone to should have my history, in detail, right? And it should be there with other hospitals too. It shouldn't be that I'm going to a Max and I'm registering there with all my data. I'm going to Apollo tomorrow and I have to re-register again with all that data. There needs to be a way for data to be shared, and so that is where the collaboration piece also comes in. The collaboration that you're talking about, if collaboration can not just be around partnerships but also around creating a data-based healthcare system in this country in which the healthcare data of patients, then it benefits both the healthcare system as well as the pharmaceutical companies, because you get the feedback, right, in terms of how things are working or not. So thank you, Rishabh. Very interesting points. And just one quick note to the audience: if you have questions, please use the Q&A tab that you can see at the bottom of your screen, mostly at the bottom of your screen, unless you have taken the control panel somewhere else, right? Don't use the chat because we are not going to look at the chat. Whatever questions you have, feel free to put them in the Q&A tab, and we'll come to the panelists with those questions as and when we get the time, right? So we will now commence the panel discussion, and given the context that Rishabh gave and the points that I made, we would really focus firstly on the fact that the second wave is largely over, right? Even though there are still some disquieting voices that say it's not really over, we are still having numbers that are higher than all other countries. But there is also the fear of the third wave that's coming, might be coming in India. I would like to ask the panelists, what is it that you are seeing in this industry from a bird's eye perspective, keeping this context in mind? This is an open question. I'd like everybody to chip in and talk to one another on this. Maybe we'll start with Vivek of Abbott.
Thanks, Alokesh. Right at this outset, wish you all a very good morning. I hope, pray, and wish each one of you on this panel and in this event is safe. Your families and relatives are safe and stay safe. These are testing times indeed. A big thanks to Accenture and the Economic Times for getting us all together and giving an opportunity for this chat. A few things that I say might sound repetitive of what Alokesh and Rishabh have so well articulated. But again, at the outset, I want to salute and appreciate the efforts of everyone in the healthcare industry. Whether it is the planners, whether it is the manufacturing, whether it is the logistics, and most importantly, all our frontline colleagues who have been making our products and services accessible. Pharmaceuticals, diagnostic devices, nutrition, services, everybody. Alokesh, to the point of what's changed, I think enough has been said and discussed as far as pandemic and healthcare is concerned. But a couple of points that I'd like to make is the spotlight on the healthcare industry, both as an industry and the healthcare infrastructure, is back. The spotlight on the healthcare infrastructure in this country and the contribution of the healthcare industry is back. That is number one. Number two, I'd like to underscore what Rishabh mentioned. I think what we saw from every healthcare organization is agility, speed, and what I would call a competitive collaboration. I think every healthcare organization as a commercial organization was competitive. But what we saw, a very beautiful aspect of this competitiveness was collaboration. And there would be enough examples shared during the course of this discussion where healthcare organizations, irrespective of their backgrounds of various types, collaborated, and they had one simple purpose: the patient in the center. How do we ensure that the patients have access to medicines, services, diagnostics, and we get out of this whole pandemic? So just to share, at Abbott we face the same challenges. We face the challenges of API, manufacturing continuity, logistics. You mentioned about, or Rishabh mentioned about the work from home versus work in the field. Whoever thought in the decades that preceded this pandemic that the pharma industry would be doing business without meeting doctors face to face? This was maybe one of the biggest paradigm changes that at least I would see in my lifetime and my careers. Whoever anticipated that for a period of almost 1.5 years, we wouldn't go to office or we wouldn't go to meet our customers, which was the norm. We had challenges in logistics. We had challenges in the way doctors met patients and challenges in the way the industry met doctors. Everything changed. And clearly the healthcare infrastructure in this country, the spotlight was on the healthcare infrastructure, and I'll maybe stop there. And I think we have tremendous opportunity now to work upon both the healthcare infrastructure as well as the way the industry approaches these challenges. At Abbott, well, we worked with manufacturing continuity at our 3 plants. We adopted digital like every other organization in the healthcare industry did. We found innovative ways and means to to maintain and sustain our logistics and access to patients across customer channels, as well as interact with our employees and customers. So, I'll stop there, Lokesh.
Right.
So I'd
So,
like to comment on what Vivek and
yes,
what Rishabh actually was saying. And taking from, in fact, what Rishabh spoke about the fact that data is indeed becoming extremely important. But that would be, to my mind, the second step, because firstly, you need to actually have the infrastructure in place, the digital roadmap in place, implementation of that before you can actually get the data. That I think is the second step, so to speak. And of course, all companies are kind of embracing this digital roadmap across the entire value chain, starting from manufacturing to supply chain to procurement to, of course, functional areas like finance, HR, and not to leave out the more important changes happening in sales and marketing as well. What is visible from, in fact, from the external perspective, whilst a lot of things contribute to internal efficiencies, there are things which actually, the public would also be aware of. And from my perspective, at least 4 changes that have been happening, which actually this industry is going through from a customer perspective. Firstly, doctors are embracing platforms, and there's a lot of surveys that has been taking place, which actually indicate this is indeed, true with a lot of doctors. More than 60% of the doctors are embracing platforms for continuous medical education, for attending webinars, for making themselves a lot more skilled in their areas, in their expertise area, so to speak. The second is from a patient's perspective. Patients are becoming a lot more enlightened, so they read up, they Google up a lot more. I'm not saying this is happening because of, in fact, COVID. It is actually keeping with the changes in times. That is, digital is all over, it's all pervading, and that's actually happening. With patients as well. They're more enlightened. They know a lot more about what they're going through, and more importantly, they would like to get, in fact, holistic service. It's just not a pharmaceutical pill that they're looking at. They're looking at, in fact, solutions which embrace, full wellness, so to speak. So that actually means that they embrace the entire ecosystem. And third, and this has been particularly true with, in fact, COVID times, the way patients have been interacting with the doctors. So digital platforms, like Practo, the M-Finds, the Librates, and a host of others have actually become, the in thing today, because, and this is something which is actually going to prevail for a pretty long time to come. The last, leg of this is essentially the way the pharmaceutical companies, the MRs, have been interacting with doctors, and that, to my mind, is evolving. Because the MRs in place is, they need to go through this, because it's going to be an evolution from their perspective. So it calls for better communication skills. It calls for potentially, live streaming of, in fact, what they need to present to the doctors, and of course, be seen by the doctors also at the same time. So there's this personal touch. So all of these are important changes that are happening in the, when you talk about the patient, doctor, MR / pharmaceutical company kind of ecosystem. More importantly, the doctors are spending a lot of time with, in fact, the digital platforms, and they're willing to allocate times for patients between 30 minutes to 2 hours for seeing patients on a digital mode. And that, I think, is very important. And of course, we'll, during the course of the conversation, we'll talk about other changes that are happening on the digital front, how data is going to be used in manufacturing, and of course, other functional areas as well.
Absolutely, and you make some very valid points. We'll come back on the doctor's visit point, because that is very critical from an industry. In fact, my younger brother works in the pharmaceutical industry. He works for Zydus, and so I also have an insider's kind of view on the industry from that POV. But I'll come to Deepak. Deepak, your initial comments on what you're seeing in terms of a bird's eye perspective, given the state of the virus currently.
Thank you, Alokesh, and it's a pleasure to be with this distinguished panel. So a lot has been spoken, so I will try and add to it on 2 or 3 dimensions that I think are extremely important from my perspective, and they are playing out in an unprecedented manner. The first one is the aspect of collaboration and partnerships. I think more than anything else, this last 15 to 18 months have demonstrated the power of collaboration and partnerships in a totally unprecedented manner. All kinds of partnerships, big pharma with generic companies with generic companies, startups with established companies, service providers with product manufacturers. All kinds of partnerships have happened. And
the CSIR and others, they're also contributing.
Absolutely. And the government, very, very interestingly, the government has also become a very important aspect of these partnerships. Many partnerships are those which are facilitated by the government. In many collaborations, the government has been a very, very important player as well. So to me, this is the one standout piece as far as the pharmaceutical industry is concerned, in terms of a much larger and a much deeper collaboration that we've been seeing. Look at India in the last 15 to 18 months. India, in spite of some of the challenges with regards to medication that we faced in the month of April and May with regards to remdesivir shortages and then the amphotericin B shortage. I mean, clearly those were periods in which the demand far outstripped the supply. But for the majority of the other 18 months, whether it's an antiviral, whether it's an antibiotic, whether it's an antipyretic, multivitamin, zinc, whatever you look at it, India has really been at the forefront of enabling medicine supply and availability, not just within the country, but also in so many other parts of the world. So to me, the whole shortage aspect, those 3 weeks of shortage of remdesivir and 3 to 4 weeks of challenge that we faced on amphotericin, yes, these are things which are certainly important learnings for us, which we should see how we can be better prepared in the third wave. But other than that, I think the Indian pharmaceutical industry has done a great job in making sure that medicines are available by and large wherever they are needed and whenever they are needed. Add to it the dimension of cost and the price at which it was made available to the patients. I think in India, when I make a global comparison, and I have done several such, happy to share in the course of this discussion, it's something to be proud of, that we actually got a large number of medicines available in a manner that people could afford it, in a manner that governments could not, would not think twice about buying them, and people really work towards making them more accessible. So that was the point on partnerships and collaborations, which ultimately played out in the manner which we need, about making medicines available to people when they need and where they need. That was one. The second aspect I want to touch upon, and we'll come to it in more detail, is about speed, agility, and Rishabh, you pointed out agility as one of the key trends, and I completely concur with that. Things which used to take months started getting done in weeks. Things which used to take years probably started getting done in a few months. And one of the things which facilitated it was the very, very strong and deep sense of urgency that everybody worked with. And in addition to that, a lot of holy cows were slayed in terms of processes, in terms of certain activities which were deemed to be not very necessary when it came to the moment of truth. And to me, that is a very, very important learning and lesson that all of us have, that if the speed and agility which everybody's demonstrated in the past 15 to 18 months, if we can continue to build on that, it can have very significant ramifications for healthcare and for pharma. The speed at which a medicine gets available from the lab to the shelf of a pharmacy, that can come down dramatically. The way in which the supply chains are tied up, the way ultimately a patient accesses the medication, the time it takes for a person to access a doctor, all of these things have changed very dramatically. And I think the onus is on the industry, the onus is on all the other key stakeholders to make sure that we build upon this and really create a paradigm shift in healthcare. So those are the two major themes I wanted to touch upon. One was the theme on collaboration, and the other was in speed and agility. Allocation.
Right, Deepak. In fact, there is a comment from the audience where VS Kantikiran Varanasi wants to know the efforts taken by pharma industry in reducing the time to market. Time of market availability from regulatory approvals to supply phase in the pandemic era. And I guess you have answered that question, in terms of the speed. But is this something that Deepak, and the questions to others also, in terms of, is this speed and agility that you're seeing today? Do you see this as something that will sustain?
Maybe I'll just add one point to what I said. It's not only the industry. Actually, I also want to really compliment the way the regulators and the government have really stepped up the game in terms of speed. In India, for example, we've been having COVID SECs maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Earlier, it used to take a long time to schedule a COVID SEC, and the speed at which the assessments are being made, the dossiers are being evaluated, that has also really come in. So, I mean, it's been an all-round effort where all the stakeholders have been involved, and certainly to the point on making drugs available to the patients earlier. I think this is an inflection point for us. If we can continue this momentum, I'm sure we are going to see a sea change in the way the availability to patients is going to be in the future.
That's very encouraging, and let's hope that that trend continues. I'll come to Vikas and Vijay, with your opening thoughts, but also this point that Ramesh was making on the visit to doctors, physical visit to the doctors, which has been challenged. That paradigm has been totally challenged by the pandemic, right? But the fact also is that as the companies took the digital route, many tended to return to status quo after the first wave, right? You get back to meeting the doctors and all. So what initiatives do you think actually delivered value and will sustain in the future, right? So Vijay and Vikas, to you, whoever wants to.
Thanks, Alokesh. A couple of things really played a very critical role. And one of those is the last mile reach of medications to the patients. And that has played a very pivotal role in making sure access to medications have increased dramatically across the country. And if you really notice, most of the companies, whether it is a Cipla or a DRL or a Lupin or a Sun Pharma, have all been able to reach out their products to the deep remote parts of the country, whereby patients need not go out, and therefore they are within the purview of the SMS route and access the medications. The second part, which possibly I feel constrained at this point of time, is I was just speaking to a couple of doctors from CMC Vellore, and where they mentioned that's an institute which purely works on evidence-based treatment protocols to any disease. And almost 5 intensive care units of that hospital refused to use products like remdesivir, bevacizumab, tocilizumab, favipiravir, and the kinds of it, saying that none of these have been formed into a protocols of evidence-based medicine. And ironically, they have used routine measures of conservative treatment of pneumonia, breathing issues, immunity, and have had one of the least incidences of mortality in the hospital, despite being a specialist hospital to take care of serious kinds of patients. So this brings about one very important thing, that as an industry, possibly we should not forget the basics of trying to say to the customer, evidence-based medicine is important, and that's where the context of meeting reps come to play. We have not been able to meet reps. It's a fact. And in the initial stages, we went through with a digital route, and that digital route was also not experimented well. And it started off with a phone call, to an email, to a WhatsApp, to a video call, and then some organized methods in which you can find means and methods to contact customers. So there has been a spate of digital connects that has been happening, including the webinar programs, as Ramesh very rightly put. And in the first 6 months, we found tremendous traction in terms of the interest generated by the customers. But what happened subsequently is, when you had 1,000 to 2,000 connects happening to the same doctor, he started getting fed up and he started switching off his approach to it. And he began to understand that the treatment protocols of COVID gets a media attention. A lot of discussion is happening. They are talking to their professors here and there, and they adopted methods. So one, while we went digital, we conducted some of the best webinars, because we are not in the acute therapy. So we don't have a lot of COVID medications, unlike many other organizations. So we went through from the specialist route, and we found reluctance from the doctors to get engaged into these. That's point number one. Point number two is, increasingly now 18 months are through, and the mental impact of this on the residual population of not exploring out to meet customers and get on a one-on-one interface with them is also beginning to show on the treatment protocols and the education levels. While some of them are very keenly following, but not everybody is able to keenly follow that aspect. We used to conduct something called as retrospective studies. Doctors are not able to conduct those studies. Our CROs have practically come to a standstill. We have one of the leading CROs in the country, and we don't see an engagement because we don't see those kind of protocols being tried. Four things which have really worked very well in the allaying this COVID is one, the companies trying to bring the vaccines to the fore, the likes of the DRLs and the Johnsons, and even Abbott was trying for it, and every other company. And that has played a very significant role in being prepared to tackle the pandemic. The other three are the forgotten industries of, trying to find means and methods to keep distance, uh, having the masks, and also having the sanitation measures or sanitizing products. We don't talk about all those things, but some of the largest business that has happened is in these three areas. For example, every generic company that operates in the market today have put across sanitizers at throwaway prices in the market to make sure that the entire population is able to access it and is able to use it frequently to bring the protocol into play. Even to this day, while we are still hopeful that maybe after about a year or so, we will come back to normalcy. But as rightly explained by Ramesh, some amount of fundamental changes will happen, which means there can be a freeze in field force enhancing numbers. People might say that the existing field force is enough. What we used to meet them 2 to 3 times, we can continue to do once, and the other times we can get into a web-based program with them. There'll be sharpness in trying to identify communication skills required to deliver to the customers. And as long as there is a connect between the company and the customers, my assessment is the challenge would be overtaken. But if that connect is not there, we may face problems going forward. So that's where I leave it, Alokesh, and I'll leave it to Vikas to address other things.
Vikas, please come in.
Allocation, thanks the fellow panelists. I couldn't agree more on many of the aspects which everybody has already covered, but I would like to pick up one or two themes which are especially relevant. Few trends which I believe are going to stay. I would say one, the industry was totally physical. I think gone are the days when we can imagine our industry to be totally physical. When I say totally physical, means the means to engage with the customer used to be only in clinic presence. It used to be only being present and physically in front of the customer. I think the new world would be more physical. Now there would be a gradient of physical to digital, from 0 to 100. During the waves, we would be 70 to 80 on a digital front. During normal times, we may be 20 or 30. I mean, only time will tell how we progress on that as a trend. But I guess gone are those days where only feet on street used to be the methodology of running the business. Of course, it will remain the mainstay, not to undermine the great effort which the whole pharmaceutical machinery and the allied services, I would say the whole healthcare machinery has done and shown during the pandemic has been exemplary. I would say a trend of coalition, that's going to stay.
Right.
I have never seen government and industry working so closely. I have never seen different players of the industry, getting together every week, finding the white spaces where we need to give access to patients for the medicines that were required, forgetting everything else, and the only goal at everybody's the approach was only to make sure that the drugs are accessible to the patients. I have never seen industry coming together. I have never seen government working so closely with the industry and serving the needs of the patient. Just to add to what Deepak said, regulator showing the kind of urgency. You approach the regulator with a plausible solution. The response used to be within no time. the partnerships, that everyone realized that, and I think that's one realization that came in for the whole industry, that there is no one player who would be able to solve this need of this entire crisis. So the only way is whomsoever is good at doing what, we just need to get together, and we just need to work as a common solution provider, I would say. So that's one trend which I believe everybody has picked up, and I see some of those trends continuing. I see some of those trends, the respect for each other, for the work that different stakeholders of the industry are doing to tide over the pandemic. I think that has gone up substantially, during these times. There has never been a higher focus on talent. The talent which the industry has looked at during all these years, the capability building initiatives which the whole workforce, and I'm not saying only sales and marketing, I'm saying production, I'm saying the usage of data, I'm referring to the way we need to approach a subject, and I'll give you examples, and this is more to do with agility, as we were speaking about. Whatever solutions we used to come up with, during the pandemic. So if morning we decided, okay, this is the possible solution to get over this problem, the life of that solution was at the most 36 to 48 hours. Within 36 to 48 hours, we used to figure out, okay, it has worked today, but either the frame of reference has changed. Yesterday there were higher numbers reported from X state. Tomorrow there is another state which is showing the peak. The whole distribution channel used to go crazy. Okay, I need to handle multiple things at one go. So while it required agility, it required a very strong data points to flow in to manage the crisis. And for putting these things together, you needed a very different lens to the talent. So the way our industry would progress, ahead, the need for talent that can look at the whole picture and give a holistic view, the talent that can collaborate with not only various stakeholders within the organization, but within the industry, with government, with startups, with hospitals, the different stakeholders, as I would put it.
Indeed, and in fact, the whole collaboration spirit is what has helped. Like Rishabh said initially, it's about the. And Rishabh, you have raised your hand. I was going to come to you only after this, but I'll also add a question for you. Like Rishabh was saying initially about the partnership between academia and all. The Covishield is when I heard that a university was developing a vaccine along with a pharmaceutical company. It was a big surprise to me because I never expected a university to be delving in commercial, of pharmaceutical products. But that's really wonderful to see. And Rishabh, please make your point. But I also do answer this other question that I have for you is, that apart from the medical representative going and meeting the doctor and basically training the doctor, keeping the doctor updated, it plays a huge role in the doctor staying updated on medical developments that are happening, right? Another thing that is really a big realization from the pandemic is that how important is the last mile, the distributor to the chemist part of the supply chain, right? In terms of maintaining availability, especially when we put new developments such as ABCD tech, in perspective. Do you see more such collaborative models emerging in this area in the future?
Thank you, Alokesh. And I just wanted to make a point before I come to that ABCD question. Vijay, I was just curious. I agree completely with you and Vikas when you say that the world in the future will be more digital, Vikas, than physical or digital. But I'm just curious to understand, Venugopal, from you, that the initiatives that we took as an industry to engage with the doctors, right, after the first wave, right, seem to have tapered down, and there was an element of fatigue with the doctors. Now, the fatigue could have been there were just many initiatives being run.
Absolutely. Let me expand this slightly, Rishabh, and I think I see that in many of the Q&As as well. The doctors have reached a fatigue point for sure. And there have been organized market research conducted by companies like IQVIA and other agencies where, doctors have shown interest to the extent of 3 to 4% in terms of accessing digital platforms. And that happened because of a barrage of people getting across to the doctor at the same time. Like the doctor has not put his phone down, another call comes, another call comes. Now, somewhere along the line in the process, there have been some organizations which decided we will not get into this and we'll just send some kind of snippets to the doctor, let the doctor view it at his convenience. That seems to have worked. But wherever the companies have tried to insist that I need to have a call which is live with the customer, seems to have backfired in some form or the other for two reasons. One, for traditional medicines to be sold out to the customers, the doctors didn't want this call to take place. If I were to go and sell a routine diabetes medicine or a depression medicine or a cardiac medicine, which has been used for the last 20 years, a digital call hardly did any purpose in engaging that customer. The customer was faced with not meeting the doctor. He's not earning his money because the patients are not coming to him. He is wanting to treat patients, and therefore, if I was able to give him a method in which he can access his patients, those companies were engaged. Well, some of the people did try. For example, there's a company called HealthPlex, which engages in EMRs and doctor consultancy. And to those doctors where the services were provided, the doctors really welcomed the intrusion of the companies from a digital platform. So that's point number one. That means if am I giving something which he is traditionally accessing, for which the doctor does not want to do it. If I'm going to give some information about the COVID or the coronavirus or the treatment protocols, yes, doctor would be interested. Many doctors did ask us, if I want to give favipiravir to my patients, do you feel that it is going to harm the patient? Not harm the patients. Can you ask a medical team to give some insights into it? For example, the way Vikas was talking about, when there is a hospitalized patients, most of us from the industry were contacting each other to say, look, I have so-and-so here. Would you be able to help out with remdesivir? And despite the government putting restrictions on the use of it, we found innovative ways to try and access and provide that help to the patients. So the digital part of it was more from a connect to make sure the protocols work well. The second part of the digital, which has worked extremely well, if you ask me, is the online procurement of medicines by the population has increased dramatically for common medicines. May not be for the COVID medicines because the doctors had to write, you needed an Aadhaar card for it, you needed other requirements. So therefore, the digital platforms have been used more to order medicines. The third area where the digital platform has worked extremely well is when you have chronic diseases and you want to access a doctor, the appointments and the ability to engage into consultation with the customers has got increased by the digital method. And those companies which have facilitated this interface have stood to gain dramatically. Not those who have just reached out to doctors as a WhatsApp message or video dispersion. So a value-added interface between organizations, customers, and patients. This triad has begun to work a little more effectively, including the trade channel. So I may put it at the four ends of a quadrilateral, which works very well. So that has increased the connect with the market, and that, to my knowledge, it will sustain in the days to come, and it will have a long lasting. And as rightly said, if the waves keep increasing, doctors will say, let us try the digital method. And as the waves keep coming down, they will ask for some amount of connect. The third point is at the hospital level. The hospital level doctors, we have just not been able to enter because of very strict protocols in the hospitals where people don't allow entry. And those doctors are hungry, not in terms of anything else. They are tired of seeing COVID patients. Mentally, they are getting affected. They need to move out and get into a degree of education, a degree of counseling, degree of understanding what is happening. And unless that improves, you would find the healthcare provider getting disturbed and troubled in the days to come. That's possibly the responsibility of the industry for us to find means and methods to get them out of this gridlock.
Right, Vijay. So Vikas and Deepak have both raised their hands. Vikas first.
Yeah, thanks, Alpesh. So, just to add to what Mr. Vijendran said, we realized, Rishabh, content is the king. This is the Netflix era. So, if you have a value to deliver in your digital initiatives, the customers really value it. Say, for example, like you mentioned, in the whole hospital setting, there was a lot of chaos. The protocols were changing with every passing day, or there was advent of new data, that used to come in on various molecules. Some of the drugs which were used during the first wave, data emerged that they may not have had a major role. So the science was evolving, is evolving, I would say, not was, is evolving. It was very important to bring that value. It's and the analogy would be there are so many shows out there on the OTT platforms. The ones which are interesting or which are of interest to you, you end up watching, right? If there is a one political drama followed by the other, followed by the other and the other, it just the fourth one just loses its value. So and I'm just giving that analogy to make things simple. So I guess the onus is on industry to make sure for what we are seeking the time of the customer, or what is the content with which we are approaching the customer. Is it to deliver a value, or is it to feel good for yourself that you are doing something? So I guess that would differentiate the participation of and the value and the lens with which customers
Absolutely. Great points being made, Deepak, and after that I'll come to Vivek. He's also raised his hand.
Sure. Thank you. So I just want to focus on the changing nature of the patient-doctor relationship. I think in the context of all of this, it's very, very important to understand that relationship and to see what implications it has for the industry and the rest of the service providers in healthcare. Clearly, the digitization of healthcare, particularly the OPD initiation, I would say happened in the COVID first wave. And in the second wave, OPD services through digital delivery has become a lot more common and a lot more established. Some of the initial teething pains have been resolved, and therefore this is a much more established way of doctors and patients interfacing with each other. The digitization of the pharmacy, in addition to the digitization of the OPD, has also resulted in patients being able to consult doctors online, order medicines online, save the pain of traveling to and fro to a clinic or to a hospital or to a pharmacy store, and also saves them from the risk of getting infected, not just with COVID, but in any sort of a hospital setting where there is always a risk of getting infected. Even for doctors, especially those maybe particularly non-surgical specialities, online is a much safer platform for seeing a patient than visiting a clinic and a hospital. And therefore, those doctors which now are proactively offering their services through digital platforms are able to see a much larger much larger number of patients who are consulting them. The next steps could potentially be the digitization of prescriptions. For online pharmacies to look at a model where you are looking at a combination of marketplace aggregation in addition to your own stocking. So there are all of these things happening which create multiple implications for the industry because of the changing nature of the relationship between the doctor, the pharmacy, and the patient. So I just wanted to lay out that dimension over and above what the rest of the panelists mentioned.
Great insight, Deepak. Thanks a lot. Vivek, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, thanks, Lokesh. I wanted to bring this phrase to the table: burning platform versus burning desire. And why do I say this? I think the Indian healthcare organization, and I don't just restrict myself to the Indian pharmaceutical organization, I think the Indian healthcare industry, not just the pharma industry, had already a place in India and under the sun with its massive contribution. Whether we were the pharmacy of the world or various treatments, etc., etc. The pandemic hit the healthcare industry in ways never imagined, from API to logistics to customer interactions, and I think all the eminent panelists have already alluded to that. The industry responded as individual companies in collaboration, again, as everybody else has said, and not only collaboration between organizations, but also collaboration between the regulatory authorities and the industry. And we all responded and reacted. That's the story so far. And then there are operational aspects and certain strategic aspects. The key will be what from this comes out as learnings and what we proactively take into the future, and what might be certain short-term operational aspects, and what might be more strategic, profound, long-term aspects, which can completely put the Indian healthcare industry in a very different orbit. And I observe certain changes, certain progressive changes, which have happened as individual companies, as collaborative industry, or the regulatory authorities. For example, the PLI scheme is an attempt to move in that direction. Brilliant. I think speedy regulatory approvals that colleagues spoke about. Brilliant. Whether it is digital, whether it is collaboration, whether it is attempts between industry and academia linkages for innovation, all these are brilliant. And I don't want to take a lot of time, because across this panel and across the colleagues attending, there is enough collective wisdom about what has happened. The key will be what amongst these forms part of a very concrete, proactive strategy going forward to take the Indian healthcare industry to the next level. I think this, and that's where I come back to the first phrase that I said, allocation team, that, a burning platform brought us here. Can a burning desire take us to the next level, where we sustain a few of these macro collaborative, speedy regulatory, going digital, adopting the new normal, as has been so often cliched way said. So that is one point, allocation team, I wanted to put. I think this is a great opportunity for the Indian healthcare industry. We have had a brilliant contribution, but I think great opportunity to go in a very concrete manner to a completely different, from being the pharmacy, can we be the innovator of the world, or whatever. I leave it to the industry leaders to.
Indeed,
I fully
indeed.
agree with what Vivek had to say about going to the next orbit, and I was wanting to say the same thing. Rishabh started off saying that agility and collaboration have been the hallmarks of success in these times. I would actually say, I would actually break it into two parts. There's a K-shaped recovery when it comes to, in fact, the firms itself. There are firms which fell by the wayside, and there are firms which did extremely well. To my mind, these firms that have done very well essentially embraced good governance, which actually meant being on top of technology, being doing the right capital allocation policies, being on top of innovation, and of course some favorable tailwinds from the governments and the environment itself. So all of these were perhaps the makings of a successful successful times in the current context. But going forward, I think there's no such thing as a sustainable competitive advantage, and we need to move from one wave of opportunity to yet another, which actually goes back to embracing technology in terms of making us a lot more efficient across, in fact, the entire value chain. But more importantly, innovation would be the key. And innovation actually mean a lot more emphasis on research and development itself. And there, I think I would actually draw upon 4 points. The first is, embracing technology. There again, how do you actually optimize on cost? Because all companies actually have a limited budget when it comes to R&D. How do you use this budget, optimize on this, and of course, get the best outcomes, which actually mean optimizing on cost, optimizing on waiting time for scientists and the like, access to information, and of course, making, in fact, their analytical studies a lot more successful in terms of outcomes. But there are other things which would actually be very important, which would be potentially government policies also. Government policies in terms of grants, in terms of fiscal, deductions, by way of tax reductions for R&D, that I think could be very conducive. And that is something which actually a lot of other successful countries, so to speak, have given. And unfortunately, in India, R&D weight reductions have been phased out, which I think should be reintroduced for this industry. The third, which I would actually say is an important part, which actually in India is not done to the extent that it does in other parts, is essentially collaboration with the academia. The last few minutes, there have been so much of talk about the fact that there has been collaboration amongst, of course, the peer group companies between innovative companies and generic companies and the like, which is again understandable from a distribution point of view and the like. But I think academia collaboration has been the hallmark of success in several parts of the globe. And to that extent, I think that is something that we should certainly encourage. The last thing which I would say is, R&D is intrinsically a very, very, it's something which actually calls for very deep pockets. And I think given the stage of development of Indian companies, they're not necessarily there. There are a few companies which actually afford a few things, but more often than not, you're going to be short of funds, and that I think we should accept. There should be more innovative ways of actually going about it. And to my mind, perhaps crowdfunding for a particular purpose, looking at the public-private partnership when it comes to actually funding of R&D projects itself, look at impact bonds. These are newer instruments which could be made available, which could actually help in deepening pockets and, of course, strengthening, what is available and what a company can contribute, and of course supplementing that with other funds to take R&D to its logical conclusion. These, I think, could be extremely important for the long-term sustenance, because whilst India has done great when it comes to the generic and copycat industry, so to speak, when it comes to innovative medicine, India is still far behind. And to that extent, perhaps in education, the way we actually look at education would be very important, because we're great when it comes to being, when it comes to siloed thinking, good at chemistry, perhaps good at biology, perhaps good at a particular domain. But taking a holistic view, combining all three, perhaps including electrical engineering to chemistry to biology, how do you actually imbibe all of those that are required to get a very holistic solution in our educational policies? That I think would also be extremely important for the long-term sustenance and growth of this industry.
Okay, we are 1 hour into our conversation, and Vikas, you have a point to make. So make a quick point before I come to Rishabh for his view on the ABCD tech.
Just wanted to extend to what Ramesh mentioned. Couldn't agree more. And the name of the game, till the time we become a totally innovative industry, would be partnerships. You will have to get access for patients of India, and then partnerships would become more and more, in licensing opportunities would become more and more important, till the time we really get there as an industry.
Correct. Rishabh, you want to, okay, Vijay, you have a point to make, but
I just wanted to add to a point here, and it's not that from innovation we have, I don't think as a country at this point of time, we are ready from that innovation point of view, because our academia proximity, as Ramesh was very rightly saying, is still not very progressive. That's point number one. Whereas we are extremely strong on chemistry part of it, ability to synthesize, manufacture. And if we recognize that as our inherent strength, and based on the pandemic that has evolved, one key area where we can really work well is working on the KSMs and making sure that we really become self-sufficient in terms of practically the entire chain of the medications that we try to manufacture within the country. Because whatever we say, in India, we have still not got a single product as an R&D product, which is a patented blockbuster kind of a product for the last 100 years. And I'm not too sure whether for the next 20 years, we have the ability to do it. Though all companies are trying, and I do wish that we succeed over there. But I guess we need to put our energies in making sure that every single product, for example, we have a range of biologics. For every biologic, what is a clone that I have to get? Where do I have to get it from? What is my return on that? What kind of productivity I can get out of it? If I'm able to do that better, then I can bring down the cost aspect of it and an access aspect of it to the population. The second part of it, which one of the gentlemen has also asked a question, is what happens if we try to get an international property waiver and bring about from
There's a question in the
countries in
audience.
terms of it. My single submission to that is, yes, during pandemic times, it's very good to do that. And I'm sure compulsory licensing or companies giving it will come to play. We need not possibly break the cycle. We have multinational companies engaging with a range of 5 to 6 companies. For example, you look at it, Gilead talked to 6 to 7 people on remdesivir, and you had a range of pricing options coming from 3 to 4,000 to 900 rupees. So therefore, the product never went through a pricing issue, excepting for that shortage of product which was there for a very few weeks. So my assessment is this compulsory licensing would become a voluntary licensing during the pandemic times. And for a country as diverse as ours, multinationals may not be able to reach the nook and corner. And therefore, partnering the way they are doing, you have a Merck coming, joining 2 companies, or you have a J&J coming, joining 2 companies, and making sure that the products are available would be a good way out. And enabling better pricing structures possibly could add to the excitement of the whole process.
Right. And so, Rishabh, your question sparked off a major conversation between everybody. So now let me come back to you with the question that I had asked of you, right? Where you could take that on, please.
Sure. No, I think all great points, and something that Deepak and Vikas and Vivek alluded to. Vivek alluded to a burning platform, and Deepak and Vikas spoke about partnerships and alliances. I think we are seeing a very different nature of this beast of alliance actually shaping up, and something that we are extremely bullish about, right?
Okay.
Companies formally come together, right, and form an alliance, right? This has not been done too many times in the past. Ramesh, you would recollect 15, 20 years back, there was an initiative known as Laser, where 7 companies came together to collaborate on cost reduction and manufacturing excellence. Possibly did not take off. Now here there are 17 Indian generic companies who have chosen to come together and invest in a new age technology, right? To create a better visibility and transparency of your route to market. Now, I think that is a big step, right? I mean, the execution because will obviously need to be seen, but to me, this is path breaking, right? And it is path breaking for 2 reasons. One is the imminent threat from your digital native companies, and I don't see them as a threat only in e-commerce. Today, that threat might be on e-commerce from an Amazon or from an 1mg or Netmeds. But in the future, once they have access to data, which I said is the new oil, there is nothing to suggest that they cannot move upstream or downstream, right? And to me, that's a threat that we should be very, very wary of, right? The other reason why it makes imminent sense for companies to come together is because of the nature of the industry. It is extremely fragmented, right? We're not a consumer goods industry where Unilever has a 40% share. At best, the market leader has a 7-8% share, and therefore it makes sense for companies to come together. And our route to market is also not the most efficient. The margins that we pay to a chemist, to a distributor, the opaqueness that we have in terms of secondary and tertiary sales means, Alokesh, that there is a huge opportunity to invest in technology, to create transparency and unlock value. And this ABCD concept on the front end is there, the use case is there, but I see a huge opportunity for companies even to collaborate on the back end. Our supply chain is extremely fragmented, right? In the first wave of COVID, we saw that while companies, big pharma companies were willing to keep their operations on and their lights on, it was the MSME and the supplier, which was the weakest link in the supply chain, right? They were severely impacted. And when they were impacted, it impacted the big pharma companies also. So is there an option for us to create an ABCD-like platform in the backend where the extended supply chains are connected, where there is visibility, better transparency, we can plan, we can execute. And if that can be done on the back end, like we have done on the front end, I think it could be a game changer, right? And to me, personally, we are quite bullish as Accenture that the way forward for the Indian pharma industry would be about collaboration, would be about technology platforms, would be about companies coming together, extending it beyond their ecosystem, and create a win-win for everyone in the stakeholder map.
Fully agree with you, Rishabh. To my mind, if you look at most industries, they have been kind of disrupted by an outsider. So you talk from IBM, we talk about the hotel industry. They've always been kind of disrupted by an outsider. And if it is never an insider who has kind of disrupted itself. So to my mind, active collaboration with the entire ecosystem, which could actually mean your own vendors, your suppliers, talking about academia, talking about potentially digital companies. All of this would be extremely important because I think from a patient's perspective, I began by saying that they've become a lot more knowledgeable, they've become a lot more enlightened, and they're Googling and looking at a host of things besides medicine, from a wellness perspective. And from that perspective, if we were to take the lead and collaborate and create an ecosystem around ourselves, that I think could be good for the industry also.
Fantastic.
Over,
Vivek, you raised
product
your
and
hand.
service. Yeah.
Vivek, you want to make your point?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, so sorry to be a bit disruptive in the discussion, but again, I'll take a step back and say something.
We are living in a disruptive era. Feel comfortable.
Yeah. So, we were talking of a pre-pandemic scenario for the Indian pharmaceutical industry or the healthcare industry, a pandemic scenario. And now we are kind of, postulating what might be the post-pandemic and what we need to do. But I just wanted to add a little bit of a drift or an angle. There are certain segments in this country, populations, geographies, class markets, etc., for whom truly a pre-pandemic, pandemic, or a post-pandemic might not be a significant difference. And that's where somebody mentioned the word access. And I just want to therefore put this on the table. I think in the pandemic, the entire spotlight on the healthcare infrastructure and the servicing, etc., came to the fore, basically because it was in certain geographies and certain class of people. One of the responsibilities we all have going forward is to take the learnings from this entire unfortunate event and see how we can genuinely improve access and take all this technology, learning, collaboration, agility, speed in regulatory approvals, ramping up manufacturing, innovation, everything as a basket. And I'll not get into details, but ensure the access of our medicines are made possible for those groups to whom this access did not exist, not only during the pandemic situation, but maybe even before the pandemic situation. I think that's a great opportunity, for all of us, and it's a responsibility as well. And a quick sub point to that: whenever I have spoken about access, the response I have got is about affordability. I think the pandemic, if not anything else, has put on the table that affordability and access are not necessarily a complete overlap, but there are a lot of shortcomings in many other aspects which hamper access. And therefore, whether for individual organizations, collaborative as an industry, or the government and the industry to collaborate together, going forward, if we can make a fundamental difference to access to medicines and affordable medicines in India, that would be a big fallout of the burning desire that I spoke about. Sorry, that's it.
So fantastic points, Vivek. And in fact, access is something that is also clearly not just a front-end operation, but is clearly also very closely and intricately linked to the back-end supply chains that are operating out there, which is something that Rishabh was talking about, and which is a question that I want to bring to Ramesh, because in terms of what you think are the overall implications on the global supply chain, post the pandemic, and do you see this trend of increased, indigenization by countries? They want to do their own thing, right? They don't want to import or take medicines from other countries. Do you see this impacting India's generics kind of business?
Firstly, there is, of course, this nationalistic fervor which seems to be gaining ground all the time. So this is a start with Trump, but given the pandemic solution context, you find a lot of other countries following suit because of strategic reasons. They would like to, and we started off saying this because they want to really control their supply chain. But if you really want India to be a large player, India is, the cost arbitrage is still there. And we did a study about a couple of years ago to see if we were to, if there is, a need to look at other locations for manufacturing sites and the like. But India clearly has an advantage over China and potentially Mexico and a host of other countries. The largest number of FDA plants outside America is in India, and that trend will continue for quite some time to come. Not merely because of the fact that it's the wage arbitrage, it's also the skill sets which goes with it. But if you really want to become a dominant player or continue to be a dominant player in this, I think the usual challenges you should certainly be looking at. Firstly, in terms of the regulatory space, so essentially the regulatory nuances that exist across various parts. It's not homogeneous. So obviously we need to be on top of that. Second, pricing in every part of the globe is very different. So obviously markets like America are extremely high price markets, whilst other markets are not so well paying. So how do we actually make sure that we are on top of cost to be the last man standing and have the ability to be the factory to the world? How do you work on that? How do you also embrace technology in terms of how do you be, because if you're talking about being the factory to the world, it also means that you need to be on top of the supply chain, the number of SKUs that there are, scheduling it across your production facilities, and making sure that there's no idle time of that matter any back orders, because it costs heavy either way. So for that it actually means that you are on top of technology for supply chain itself. And more importantly, if you are opening up, beachheads in various markets, not to capture that market, not to get to that market, how do you actually culturally integrate those? These would be questions that I would ask for any country which has this, which aspires global, dominance or wanting to become global in this field.
Absolutely. And Deepak, you have raised your hand, and I was coming to you with another question which is related also. So you do make your point, but also please take on this question. Where basically we are talking about, we mentioned the dependence on China for KSMs, which is also a critical aspect of our supply chains, right? APIs were something that India was self-dependent at some point earlier, but now that has gone because of various reasons, whatever the reasons are. Right now, the government has responded through a renewed push through the PLI scheme. There are some parks being planned, right? All sorts of incentives are being given. And so what more needs to be done really to translate this to real action? Because you're heading APIs for Dr. Reddy's, right? So give us an insight into the API scenario.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Alokesh. So I think while there is a trend for more localization, more indigenization, at the same time, let's not forget the fundamentals. The fundamental is that increased indigenization, unless backed up by sound economics, cannot last in the long run. It would result in suboptimal production, higher costs, increased prices, and the pressure would come back firmly on it. So indigenization or localization by itself is not just the only dimension that we are talking about here. I think in the long run, controlling the rising healthcare costs, most countries would prefer to procure from economically viable and affordable sources, even if they are not indigenous. But maybe they would need tie-ups through very solid partnerships, which kind of give you an assurance of the supply chain not getting disrupted in the case of a situation which is unexpected, like the one we experienced in the last 18 months. Now, with regards to Indian generics, the point which was made by Ramesh, I think Indian generics have created a good image around the world of being affordable with good quality. But I think the future is also going to be very much a function of scale. If you look at APIs, if you look at intermediates, if you look at the key starting materials for all of these, the reason China is the world leader in that is not by chance. It is because of a very well thought through set of measures undertaken over a period of time, over 3 to 4 decades, which have resulted in 60 to 70% of the world's APIs having some sort of a footprint in China. And I think this is a combination of efforts made from the government side, made from the industry side, in getting some sort of a clustering done to create economies of scale, to create better conditions for things like power, things like utility, for land, for effluent treatment, and all of that to create that right sort of infrastructure, that right sort of ecosystem, which enabled companies to get up to a scale which was almost unprecedented. So unprecedented that it wiped out the industry in many other parts of the world and really took it to a different level. So in terms of what implications it has for us here in India, I would talk of it from the standpoint of maybe 3 broad themes: the theme on R&D, the theme on manufacturing, and the theme on infra. On R&D, I think people have spoken about, but increased funding, especially from both public and private side for certain specific areas which are absolutely crucial to India's healthcare security. I think that has to be there more and more for us to look at that additional innovation dimension that we are talking about. There have been at various points of time in the past tax incentives for pharma R&D. I think that's something which we have to continue to look at, and collaborative research between the industry and academia also is a point which was made in the past. And I can share that from experience. Dr. Reddy is tied up with the Hyderabad Central University to create something called DRILS, Dr. Reddy's Institute of Life Sciences, which has been a very, very important aspect of our entire R&D and innovation journey over the past decade. So that's on R&D. To the second part on manufacturing, I think the PLI scheme is definitely a step in the right direction. More and more such versions coming in every 2 to 3 years. I think that is going to be extremely helpful. The other thing on manufacturing is that CapEx is always a very important aspect of manufacturing. So if there is a mechanism to create some sort of a financial structuring of CapEx for pharma, I think that will be very helpful, and this could mean collaboration with a completely different industry. But I think that would also help in getting those large-scale factories, which could allow us to compete with producers in China. And finally, I think there have also been aspects around infrastructure. So not just the center, but also different states have been taking those measures in terms of coming up with pharma parks, in terms of coming up with pharma cities. So promotion of these kind of activities, not just looking at one aspect like API or formulations, but looking at healthcare in an integrated fashion, will allow us to bring to the fore the capabilities that we have in abundance here in India, the capability of chemistry, the capability of formulations, the capability of digital technologies. I think putting all of that together in a manner that it creates an integrated solution will also help in the way forward. It's not something which will happen by the press of a button. It's a long journey, but I think we need to make a start. We are taking the right steps. We need to dial up on these efforts. We need to strengthen these efforts so that we are able to move in that direction and have a leadership position in the pharmaceutical space in the coming decades.
So clearly, very well outlined, Deepak. Thanks. And clearly there are challenges in the way, and it's a slightly long journey, but things are moving in the right direction, and that is what we should take comfort from. There is a very interesting question from Jagmohan Singh Rishi in the audience. It's a slightly different question from what we have been discussing so far, and he's saying that one interesting aspect raised was the influence of e-commerce companies like 1mg and PharmEasy, etc. Right? Now you combine that with data is the new oil, and he asks, do we think that the industry is becoming more consumer-centric rather than customer-centric? Right? Rather interesting question. Who wants to answer? Maybe I'll take it to Vikas and Vijay.
Yeah, so quite interesting concept. Consumer centricity. I think consumer centricity was always at the core of what pharmaceutical industry did. While we've treated customer, doctor as a customer, being the influencer, but whatever we did was always keeping the patient, at the heart of it. So I wouldn't say that it's a trend which was not there earlier. But yeah, with the advent of more access to information, with the advent of patients getting to Google before they actually go to the doctor, the need for consumer centricity is higher than before. Would be my take on it.
Yeah. One other point that is very relevant over here is with the online pharmacy, the choice is now beginning to be given to the customer to exercise whether he wants a low-cost medicine or he doesn't want one. That's option number one. You're finding many online pharmacies engaging doctors who write prescriptions, and those prescriptions are given to the patients as options based on the cost dimension that is there. So you are able to really bring about value to the customers. And in that extent, Yes, it is consumer-centric. There is no two ways about it. But having said that, I think most pharmaceutical companies, if not everybody, would have been focusing on the end consumer. And that's where the concept of pricing, availability, access, for all those things come to play. The ones which Vivek was trying to say. Whether even you take a multinational company which is going to be launching, let's say, a monoclonal antibody today or a cocktail of an antibody, and they're pricing it at about 50, 60,000 rupees as a cocktail which takes care of it. Now, that's keeping in mind various costs that are involved into it. And if it is going to be a single dose which takes care of it, prevents hospitalization, the end benefit to the customer is much higher than what he is likely to encounter had he not got those options. So that's point number one. In the same yardstick, I think in a couple of questions people have asked, why don't the top companies join hands together and start, marketing the products at cost value? So I mean, I really love it because just imagine a state of government where everything is available at cost. Then you have no industries left, then you don't have any webinars left, then we don't have anything that works through in terms of making anything. So that may be very far regressive in terms of a step, but I would like to say that India possibly is amongst the lowest priced medicines in the world today. You have maybe a fever medicine being sold at less than a rupee in many markets. You have a pain medicine sold at less than a rupee, and you have diabetes and cardiac medicine sold at less than 2 to 3 rupees. I mean, which part of the world can you get prices better than this? And if you can, then you should let us know that possibly we should try and get medicines from those places and give it to the population here. So
Yeah.
I think the people need to keep away from this misnomer that the Indian pharmaceutical industry uh, tries to extract money out of people. We don't. And I can say for all the organizations here, including the multinationals where Vivek is sitting from, possibly Abbott Healthcare and Abbott India Limited would have some of the products at the most economical prices. The Thyronorm, which is sold by Abbott India Limited, is 1 rupee a tablet a day. It's 300 rupees per month. You name what kind of medication would be available at that kind of prices. So I think we need to recognize those things. And if the second part is also true, in the same yardstick, the same gentlemen have asked, why don't we invest in R&D and get vaccines ahead of everybody else? To invest in R&D, we need to make some money. If we have to make some money, we need to sell at good prices. So this is a kind of a statement which has no end to it. It's a circle. So my assessment is two. One, whatever is the true value of medications that we need to give, and therefore, in the interest of the consumer and the customer, we need to bring to the fore what is accessible, what is affordable, and what is easily available within the organization or in the context of the country. And if we adopt these three principles, I'm sure none of these questions would come to the fore, and we would
Thank you.
be customer-centric and consumer-centric.
Yeah, thank you, Vijay, with some very pertinent points. And I see that you have trawled through the questions, gone through the questions given by the audience. We have almost more than 70 questions here. So,
yes.
And it's very interesting to see some of those questions. And one question I'd really like to take to Ramesh and Rishabh, and it has come from A. Rajurkar, where he says, there's a change in the promotion and the marketing model because of the pandemic, right? And so the OPEX costs are down, because you're not having to travel, the MRs are not going to the doctor. So there's a cost saving. There are many other cost savings that larger enterprises are doing. How and where is this cost saving going to be plowed back to drive future growth? And that is a question from the audience. And to I'll add my part to it is to drive innovation as well. Ramesh.
First point is, whilst there are savings obviously on promotion costs and travel costs and the like, the fact of the matter is, Vijay just spoke about the fact that India is in fact the lowest priced market in the world, but you also find in several of the markets prices to be eroding. It's not as the prices are constant in every part. The generic industry is all about a big upside on launch and then thereafter a continuous downside. It's a bit like running on the treadmills. If you stand still, then you're going to be regressive. Then you're going to fall off it. So potentially you'll have to be added with newer products all the time. That calls for research and development expenditure and the like. This is not to state that we have reached the pinnacle when it comes to, in fact, the cost frontier itself. So there is tremendous scope out there. So we would be continuously looking at various ways of reducing costs, be it on the procurement front, be it on the routes to synthesis, and of course employment of various digital means to lower, in fact, the cost of production on the manufacturing front. The constant lookout for a golden batch, using, in fact, newer technologies. So we always use SCADA, PLC systems, DAC systems, etc., to monitor various parameters for manufacturing. But how do you actually bring it together to look at the reduction by way of the golden batch for every batch, so to speak, using data for diagnostic, for predictive and prescriptive analytics. So you actually reduce on various things, including the predictive maintenance, looking at video analytics for interventions, looking at, in fact, the twin engine, so to speak, for process optimization, quality, maintenance, supply chain, all over. So essentially, the pursuit of cost reduction initiatives is constant, and that's the only way we can actually move from one wave of opportunities to yet another.
Right. So, Rishabh, to you, from your consultant hat, what is the way to fund this innovation? R&D is something that Indian companies invested in, more than 2 decades ago. The likes of pioneering efforts of Dr. Anji Reddy and, founder of Dr. Reddy's and other such great people who others thought were mad to invest in R&D at that time, because investing in R&D, you're not going to make any money. Right, but the fact is that R&D needs to be invested in, and we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to innovate. Is it just the OPEX cost savings is not going to be enough, right? So, what do you think, Rishabh, are the things that organizations such as those who are here at this table and in the audience should do?
So, a couple of things, Alokesh. I think one is, like Ramesh said, we fundamentally need to reset our cost structures. I don't see the current levels of profitability sustaining. These are more inflated. When things get back to normal, there'll be some things that will, again, visits will happen, travel will happen, some marketing expenditure will happen. But because the future of work and workplace will look very different, we believe that some cost structures will get permanently reset. The ideal way to invest in new technology and digital should be about unlocking and using these funds, right, that you actually derive to invest in new technologies, right? In the past, we've seen companies balk at the idea of investing in technology, not knowing whether these new age technologies and digital will give return or not. So our advice to promoters is that reset your cost structures, look at the bad money, the money that is non-productive, and use that to fund some of your digital initiatives. Now, once that happens, it becomes a virtuous cycle going forward, right? So clearly, this is an opportunity for us to flow back money into new technologies, new digital initiatives, and things like that. When it comes to R&D, I think partnerships, public-private partnerships, right, and working together with academia is the way forward. Now, whether we want to continuously think about ourselves being about being paranoid about NC or not, I leave it to the industry, right? Whether that's a pipe dream for us to continue chasing, or we actually come to the reality that, look, we are good at a few things, right? And we will keep getting better in that, rather than chasing a pipe dream, which may or may not materialize. So to me,
just out-license.
Absolutely, the partnership alliances are not a bad thing to do, right? Yeah. And I think one needs to be able to do that. And what Vikas said, that we also need to invest in capability and talent, right? For too long, we've continued to run with a set of individuals largely from the same industry in the same sector. The future will look very different. The future will be about data. The future will be about analytics, will be about new technologies. And you will need to pivot your employees in that direction, which will mean they will come at a cost. So one will need to keep all these considerations in mind as we move forward.
Vivek, you raised your hand. We are out of time, but you make a point.
Quick couple of points on how to fund or encourage or accelerate this R&D aspect. Number one, we all contribute to certain amount of CSR funding. So one of the ideas is, if the government says, all healthcare companies, whatever CSR they contribute, if you can go to a central R&D fund, run by ICMR or whatever, and that becomes a corpus for the government and the academia to collaborate and research molecules which can then be commercialized. That's number one. Number two, the pandemic saw unprecedented level of collaboration between organizations globally and in India, and between India and other countries. So, for example, in US, you had certain vaccine manufacturers developing the vaccine and collaborating with others to manufacture. In India, for the first time, we have seen multiple companies going to the regulator and doing clinical trials together. You never saw these things earlier. If this can happen thanks to a pandemic, going forward, burning desire, why it can happen for innovation and development, or I&D, or R&D. Last but not the least is the often used point about industry and academia. Somewhere, if that really can be taken to the next level, because you have the scientific talent in the academia, and if industry and the government collaborates to do the funding and provide that platform. Fourth point is about IP protection. I know this is a slightly touchy subject, so I won't elaborate more on this. But I think for any innovation, it is important that there is a certain degree of IP protection, which encourages an organization of any origin or nationality. Very, very surprisingly, somebody mentioned that in the last 100 years, Indian healthcare companies haven't had an IP product. But it is also ironical that India has one of the highest patents in non-healthcare industries. So it's not that we as a country are not able to innovate or bring newer ideas. But somewhere in healthcare, I feel if we have a certain degree of IP protection, then organizations would be more encouraged to invest and then have those commercial aspects. That's all.
Very, very interesting points, Vivek. And the point on CSR was something new that I've heard, and it's interesting. But also, of course, if you put CSR funds into a centralized fund, you don't know what happens to that money. A, B, what happens to the good work that all your companies are doing in the CSR area. But maybe a kind of a, since the 2% rule of CSR is that 2% of your net profit, right, it has to be invested in it. Maybe you increase it and add another percent there for R&D, which is also quite a lot of money, right? And good. I think we have had a really great discussion, lots and lots of insights, fantastic points. Rishabh, I would really have liked to take closing notes from each one of you, but we are already at 11:36, so we wouldn't have time for that. Rishabh, you want to give your closing remarks, and then we'll come.
Absolutely fine, Lokesh. I think I completely echo your sentiment. I think great interaction. I think this could have continued for another hour, if you ask me.
Easily.
I think very diverse perspectives from all of you. And in some sense, people did summarize in terms of how they're seeing this move forward, Alokesh. So I'm perfectly fine. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank everyone on the panel. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did, and look forward to another opportunity to reconnect back in a couple of months' time. Hopefully, we'll be out of COVID, and hopefully we'll be back to our offices, meeting customers and suppliers likewise.
And hopefully next time we do this conversation, we'll be doing it physically, right, in a hotel room. And we can meet up and chat and share tea and snacks. And so thank you very much, Rishabh, for your closing note. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Vikas, Ramesh, Vivek, Deepak. Absolute privilege to have all of you on this panel. We look forward to being in touch. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alokesh. And thank you, Nidhi. Thank you.